This commenter is asking about their dog, who is about 3 years old now, and despite their attempts to intervene and support their dog, is still displaying reactive behavior. They don't feel that he's made much progress in that time. And they've had trainers tell them to use food to train the dog, but they're worried that this has backfired because they feel like they don't have much of a bond with the dog, and that the dog is only interested in them if they have food. They give some additional context saying that the dog's behavior started, the reactivity started around 5 months old. But even before then, when the dog came home at 3 months, the dog was, they described as shy and not confident. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to do it carefully, one piece at a time. We often see reactive behavior begin in adolescence, which typically starts around 6 months of age, but there are some different variables that can make it start a little sooner, make it start a little later. And so we may see a dog starting adolescence around 5 months. It would be on the earlier end of things. When we're seeing reactive behavior, what we usually describe as reactive behavior at 5 months, before adolescence or at the very start of adolescence, that has generally been brewing for longer. The underlying emotion around the triggers has likely been brewing for longer before we reach that behavioral threshold. Generally, in my client population of dogs who experience dysregulation chronically, like they have anxiety disorders, for example, I may hear them described as an 8-week-old puppy, a 12-week-old puppy, a 16-week-old puppy, as shy or not confident. And often after digging in a bit more, we find that that might be more accurately described as fear. And it's typically not developmentally appropriate caution. So I would be curious about that, just sort of back tracing a bit. My suspicion would be that if I'm seeing reactivity at 5 months, then the standoffishness, the avoidance, the disinclination to engage at 3 months was likely rooted in that same emotion that is now showing up as reactivity. But we see how it presents shift based on where the dog is developmentally, their learning experience, etc. And I find that for my clients who have had their dogs from puppyhood, sometimes this is reassuring to hear that things were not going right from the start when the puppy came home, because this points to underlying contributing factors like genetics, early environment, which includes things like maternal care, in utero conditions. When I have a new client inquiry that involves a puppy pre-adolescence, either they missed that I specialize in dysregulation and aggressive behavior, and I refer them to one of my wonderful colleagues, or if they have a dog who is dysregulated at that young of an age, we are getting to a veterinary behaviorist or a veterinarian specializing in behavior as fast as we possibly can, because this is a medical issue. Dysregulation is a medical issue. But in puppies this young, we have a unique opportunity to change how the brain is developing because it is not developing appropriately. So if those dogs are coming to me at 3 years old, at 5 years old, at 10 years old, we still generally are seeing a medical issue, a health issue, a nervous system that is set higher than ideal. And this is not just a problem for behavioral health, but also emotional health, also physical health. And so at those stages as well, we are involving a veterinarian. But I just recently had an inquiry for a 4.5-month-old puppy who is displaying signs of anxiety. And that's different from, being fearful at a certain point. This is broad anxiety. Even when there aren't triggers around, there's the concern that there could be a trigger. That's anxiety, right? Things are scary even when the scary thing's not there. And one of the first things that we are going to do is see if we can change the way this puppy's brain is developing, not just through behavior modification, but also through veterinary intervention. These dogs are also highly likely to have comorbid, what we think of as physical health issues going on. And this can be sort of a chicken and an egg thing. And it's not that we're expecting to find physical health concerns that, remove the anxiety disorder or cancel out the anxiety disorder or whatever else is going on. but they can significantly contribute to it, intensify it. And of course, we have a quality of life concern with untreated physical health issues. The chances are very high statistically that there are comorbid health issues. And so figuring out where to look and then looking there is often a big part of this. Because living with that higher than ideal level of stress can cause physical health issues, and physical health issues can cause a dog to have more trouble regulating their stress, dealing with stress. One of the things that can be really important when I'm first taking on a case can be to investigate previous interventions. What has worked, what hasn't worked, and it's not even that black and white. What impact has the intervention had? So I would be super interested to know more about the training that has been done with food, because we can use food for a lot of different reasons: to help with management through distraction and redirection, to help with self-regulation, to get the dog to engage in species-typical behaviors that bring down their arousal, to counter condition, so to pair the trigger with something positive in the work of changing the dog's emotional association with the trigger. But oftentimes what I see, particularly if we're saying we haven't seen any progress, these are two common things that I see. One is that we are using treats in combination with suppression. So at the same time that we are using food, we are also using punishment or aversives to suppress the behavior. And that can often cancel out any work that we're doing with food or any positive work we're trying to do, especially for dysregulated dogs. We know that punishment increases aggression, increases anxiety, increases apathy, and increases aversion toward the associated stimuli, which can be anything in the environment, including us potentially. Another common thing I see is that we're going with no punishment, no suppression, but we're focusing on operant behaviors. So instead of addressing the anxiety, we're doing things like trying to teach alternative behaviors, asking the dog to sit or stay in place. And we're often doing so over threshold. So we're trying to be consistent, but we're consistently working with the dog in a way that's actually strengthening negative associations without actually addressing the underlying function of the behavior, which is the anxiety. Another common mistake that I see is folks will be using food, they'll be doing counter conditioning, but they'll specifically be working with the presenting concerns, the things that are most aversive to us, without looking at holistic stress reduction, without focusing on building resilience, without building the ability to self-regulate, without looking at things like sleep hygiene and physical health issues and diet and nutrition. And again, I don't know anything about this commenter. I'm not suggesting that that's what's happening with this specific dog because I don't know enough, but these are common scenarios that I see when people are saying, we've been working really hard, we've been putting in all of this time and effort and emotional energy, but we're not seeing progress, or things have gotten worse. In fact, that was the inspiration behind our webinar trio that looks at those 3 pillars of behavior therapy, because without them, without the holistic stress reduction, the building of self-regulatory skills, the building of resilience, all of which is very nuanced, our behavior work isn't going to be as ethical and effective as it could be. This is where it can be really helpful to work with a behavior consultant versus a trainer. And there's no regulation in our industry, so anyone can be using any of these terms. But what I mean by that is someone who works with and specializes in working with behavior concerns versus someone who works on like primarily operant conditioning, manners, sports, tricks, service dog work, those types of things. For behavior concerns, we want someone who works with behavior concerns. And a veterinary behaviorist or a veterinarian who specializes in behavior but may not be a full veterinary behaviorist can also be really, really helpful. As always, if I can be of further help, I invite folks to send an email. I'm happy to share resources. I do work with folks virtually, but I am happy to help folks connect with someone who can best support them or point them in the direction of more resources if they are not ready to dive into behavior therapy, but would like to increase their dog's quality of life and reduce stress in the meantime.